In 1932, a coal miner's wife in Kentucky fed a family of 8 on $4 a week. She never threw away a single thing, not a bone, not a rag, not a drop of grease. Number 7 on this list is something modern preppers spend hundreds of dollars replacing with gadgets that do it worse. Number 2 kept families alive when the money ran out completely. These 20 tricks turn nothing into enough. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down 20 Great Depression survival tricks that make modern preppers look wasteful. Number 20. The grease can. Every stove in America during the 1930s had a coffee can sitting on the back of it, half full of pale, golden fat. When your great-grandmother fried bacon, she poured the drippings through a scrap of cloth into that can and kept it right there by the burner. Nothing about it was disgusting to her. It was money. That fat greased the skillet for eggs. It went into biscuit dough for flakiness. It fried potatoes, seasoned green beans, and got rubbed into cast iron to keep it black and slick. A pound of lard cost real money she did not have, so she made her own out of the meat she already bought. Modern preppers buy shelf-stable cooking oil by the case and rotate it before it goes rancid. She never bought cooking fat at all for weeks at a stretch. The grease can refill itself every morning. When it finally got low, that told her it was time to cook something with fat in it. A single can, tended carefully, replaced an entire shelf of what we now consider pantry staples. She threw away nothing, and her food tasted better for it. Number 19. Preserving eggs in water glass. Chickens do not lay evenly. In spring, a small flock buried you in eggs. By deep winter, they laid almost nothing, so your great-grandmother solved the problem months in advance with a technique that sounds like witchcraft today. She stirred sodium silicate, sold at the drugstore as water glass, into cooled boiled water in a stone crock. Then she lowered fresh, unwashed eggs into that thick, syrupy liquid, point down, layer by layer, until the crock was full. The solution sealed every pore in the shell, locking out air and bacteria. Those eggs kept for 8 or 9 months in a cool cellar, still good enough to fry and perfectly fine for baking. A crock of water glass cost pennies and held dozens of eggs through the leanest part of the year. Modern preppers spend a fortune on freeze-dried egg powder in number 10 cans that taste like cardboard. She stored real eggs, whole and fresh, using a jar of clear goo and the eggs her hens were already giving her for free. When the snow got deep and the coop went quiet, her family still ate eggs for breakfast. Number 18. Newspaper for everything. A newspaper cost 2 cents, and in a Depression household, it did the work of 10 different products before it was allowed to reach the trash, if it ever did. Read first, of course, then stuffed between the wallpaper and the wall as insulation against the winter wind that came through every crack, then layered under the bed sheets of children who slept in unheated rooms because paper traps body heat better than an extra blanket. Wet newspaper twisted tight into a hard knot became a fuel log that burned as long as coal when coal ran out. Dry sheets wrapped root vegetables in the cellar, keeping them from touching and rotting. Crumpled paper polished window glass, streak-free, with a splash of vinegar. It lined shelves, wrapped garbage, started fires, and finally hung on a nail in the outhouse. Modern preppers buy insulation panels, fire logs, produce storage bags, and glass cleaner as 4 separate purchases. She had one product delivered to the porch that did all of it and informed her of the news besides. Nothing in a modern prepper supply closet works that hard. Number 17. Stretching the coffee. Coffee was a luxury that working families refused to give up, so they learned to make a little go impossibly far. Your great-grandmother mixed her ground coffee with roasted chicory root, roasted barley, or even ground, roasted dandelion root to double or triple what was in the pot. The additions were not just filler. Chicory gave the brew a deep, almost chocolate bitterness that people came to prefer, which is why New Orleans still drinks it that way today. She also never wasted a used grounds. She dried them on the windowsill and ran them through a second time when the tin got low. Some households cleared and settled the grounds with a crushed eggshell dropped right into the pot, which pulled the bitterness and left the coffee clear. A pound of coffee that should have lasted a week stretched to 3. Modern preppers stockpile vacuum-sealed beans by the case and grind them fresh for a single strong cup. She got the same comfort, the same warm ritual at the same kitchen table out of a fraction of the beans, using roots that grew wild in the yard for free. Number 16. The immortal sourdough starter. Commercial yeast cost money and did not keep, so the smart cook kept a living crock of sourdough starter alive on the counter, feeding it a little flour and water, and it never died. That bubbling jar was a family's entire bread supply, self-renewing, requiring nothing but the flour they already had. It raised the morning biscuits, the loaf bread, the flapjacks, and the Saturday cinnamon rolls. Some starters were decades old, carried west in covered wagons, passed from mother to daughter like a piece of jewelry. During the Depression, a good starter was so valuable that neighbors shared cupfuls of it the way people now share a phone charger. It cost nothing to maintain and made bread with a flavor no store loaf could match. Modern preppers buy sealed foil packets of instant yeast and store them in the freezer, praying the expiration date holds. She had a jar of flour and water that had been alive longer than she had, that could not expire, could not run out, and would feed her grandchildren long after she was gone. It just needed to be remembered. Number 15. Flour sack everything. Companies that sold flour, sugar, and animal feed figured out something clever in the 1930s. Women were using the plain cotton sacks to make clothing, so the mills started printing the sacks in floral patterns and cheerful prints. Your great-grandmother chose her flour brand by which pattern she needed to finish a dress. A 50-pound sack, emptied and boiled to fade the logo, became a girl's Sunday dress, a boy's shirt, an apron, a set of pillowcases, or a dozen diapers. The string that sewed the sack shut was unraveled and saved for mending. Nothing about the packaging was packaging to her. It was raw material she had already paid for. 3 feed sacks made a dress with fabric to spare. Modern preppers buy vacuum bags, storage totes, and emergency clothing kits, then throw away the packaging every single thing arrived in. She wore her packaging to church. An entire family could be clothed head to toe in fabric that technically came free with the groceries. And no one who saw those bright printed dresses on Sunday would have guessed they started life holding chicken feed. Number 14. Lye soap from ashes and grease. Store soap cost money, and money was the one thing nobody had. So your great-grandmother made her own from 2 things she already threw off as waste. She saved wood ashes from the stove all winter, then poured water slowly through them to leach out lye. She combined that lye water with the meat fat and grease scraps she had been saving, cooked it down in a big kettle over an outdoor fire, and poured it into a wooden mold to harden. Cut into bars, that soap washed the family, the dishes, the laundry, and the floors. It was harsh, yes, but it cut grease like nothing you can buy, and it cost absolutely nothing but time and the willingness to save what others burned or dumped. Modern preppers stock hundreds of bars of commercial soap and gallons of detergent, and when it runs out, it runs out. She could make more forever from a cold stove and a can of old bacon fat. The 2 waste products of every Depression kitchen, ashes and grease, combined into the one thing that kept a family and its home clean. Number 13. The cellar and the sandbox. There was no chest freezer humming in the garage. Your great-grandmother kept her harvest alive all winter, using nothing but a cool, dark corner of the cellar and the physics of dirt. Potatoes went into slatted bins in the dark so they would not sprout. Carrots and beets got layered in boxes of damp sand, which kept them crisp and firm until March, as if they had just come from the garden. Cabbages hung upside down by their roots. Apples were wrapped individually in newspaper so one rotting fruit could not spoil the rest. Onions and squash cured on shelves in the dry air. A properly stocked cellar held 6 months of vegetables using 0 electricity, 0 batteries, and 0 moving parts. Modern preppers spend thousands on freezers and generators to keep those freezers running when the power fails, and lose everything if the fuel runs out. She had a hole in the ground, a few crates, and a bag of sand, and her family ate garden vegetables in the dead of winter. The system never failed because there was nothing in it that could break. Number 12. The darning egg. A single hole in a sock was not a reason to buy new socks. It was a 5-minute job. Your great-grandmother kept a smooth wooden darning egg in her sewing basket, and every week she slipped it inside the worn heels and toes of the family's socks, stretching the fabric tight over the curve. Then she wove new thread across the hole, over and under, back and forth, until the gap became a small patch of fresh weave stronger than the sock around it. She patched knees, turned frayed collars inside out to hide the wear, and let out hems as children grew. A pair of socks lasted years, not months, because every hole got mended the day it appeared. Modern preppers buy cases of new socks and toss them at the first sign of a hole, calling it rotation. She would have found that unthinkable. That wooden egg, which cost a nickel and lasted a lifetime, saved more money over the years than most preppers keep in their emergency fund. Clothing was not disposable. It was maintained the way you maintain a tool you depend on. Number 11, nothing left the pot. When your great-grandmother boiled greens, she did not pour the dark water down the drain. That was pot liquor, thick with iron and vitamins, cooked out of the vegetables, and she saved every drop. It went into the next soup as a base, or got sopped up with cornbread as a meal in itself. Pasta water, cloudy with starch, thickened gravies. The water from boiling potatoes went into bread dough, where it fed the yeast and softened the crumb. Meat that had been simmered for broth was picked clean and stretched into a second dish. Even the water that canned vegetables were packed in got used, never dumped. She understood, without a chemistry lesson, that flavor and nutrition dissolve into water, and that pouring that water away was pouring away food. Modern preppers drain and discard without a thought, then buy bouillon cubes and stock, concentrate, to add back exactly what they just washed down the sink. She never bought stock in her life. She simply refused to throw away the liquid that food had already flavored for free, and her cooking was richer for it. First pattern break. Here is where you have to understand something about these people that modern prepping completely misses. Prepping today is about buying. You buy the buckets, the water filters, the solar panels, the freeze-dried lasagna with a 25-year shelf life. Preparedness has become a shopping category, a thing you acquire with a credit card and store in a closet you hope you never open. But the people who actually survived the worst economic collapse in American history did not buy their way through it. They could not. They had no money. What they had was knowledge, and knowledge weighs nothing, costs nothing, and never expires. A woman who knew how to make soap from ashes was more prepared than a man with a garage full of supplies, because when his supplies ran out, he was helpless, and when her ashes ran out, she made more tomorrow. That is the difference. They were not stockpiling against a bad year. They were living a way of life where waste itself was the enemy, and that made them harder to defeat than any bunker. Number 10. The yard was a grocery store. To your great-grandmother, the weeds in the yard were dinner. Dandelions, every part of them, went into the pot. The young leaves made a bitter salad wilted with hot bacon grease. The roots were roasted for coffee. The yellow flowers were battered and fried or turned into wine. Lamb's quarters, purslane, wild onion, poke salad in the spring, and chickweed all grew for free in the ditches and fence rows, and she knew everyone by sight. These greens were packed with more nutrition than anything in the garden, and they cost nothing but the walk to gather them. A family could eat fresh greens for months on what grew wild within 100 yards of the house. Modern preppers buy seed vaults and hydroponic kits and grow lights, trying to manufacture the food security that was already lying in the grass outside. She looked at a field of weeds and saw a salad bar. That knowledge of which plants fed you and which ones did not was passed down mouth to mouth and is nearly gone now, replaced by a distrust of anything that did not come sealed in plastic. Number 9, rendering every scrap of fat. When a hog was butchered, nothing was wasted, and the fat was treated like treasure. Your great-grandmother cut every bit of it into cubes and cooked it low and slow in a big kettle until the fat melted out clear and golden, strained and poured into crocks that lard kept for a year without refrigeration and became the cooking fat for the entire household. The crispy brown bits left behind, the cracklings, were salted and eaten as a treat or baked into cornbread. Even the leaf lard from around the kidneys, the finest grade, was saved separately for pie crust because it made pastry no shortening could equal. One hog produced enough lard to fry, bake, and season a family's food for months. Modern preppers buy shortening and oil by the case and let it go rancid on the shelf. She rendered her own from an animal she raised, storing calories in a form that outlasted almost anything on a modern prepper's shelf. That golden fat was a battery, packing the energy of a whole animal into a crock she could dip into all winter, and it cost her nothing she had not already grown herself. Number 8. Canning until the jars ran out. Late summer in a Depression household meant the kitchen ran hot for weeks because everything that could be preserved was being preserved. Your great-grandmother filled glass jars with green beans, tomatoes, corn, peaches, pickles, jams, and whole quarters of chicken, sealing them shut with a rubber ring and a lid in a boiling water bath or a pressure canner. Those jars lined the cellar shelves by the hundreds, a wall of food that would carry the family from October to May. The jars themselves were used again every single year for decades, so the only recurring cost was a packet of new rubber rings. A summer garden, canned properly, fed a family straight through winter with real vegetables and fruit. Modern preppers buy cases of commercially canned goods stamped with expiration dates, then throw them out when the date passes, even though the food is fine. She controlled her entire food supply with reusable glass and her own 2 hands. Nothing expired on her watch because she put it up herself and knew exactly what was in it. Those shelves of shining jars were the original prepper stockpile, and they cost almost nothing to refill. Number 7. The string ball and the button jar. In the corner of every Depression kitchen drawer sat 2 things that tell you everything about how those people thought: a ball of string that grew a little bigger every week and a jar full of buttons. Your great-grandmother untied the string from every parcel, every feed sack, every bakery box, and wound it onto that ball rather than cut it, because a length of string was useful and buying twine was foolish when string arrived free with everything. The buttons came off every worn-out shirt before the fabric became a rag, saved in the jar so no future garment ever needed store-bought buttons. She saved rubber bands, safety pins, nails straightened with a hammer, screws, jar lids, and scraps of wire, all sorted and kept because the day would come when she needed exactly that thing and would not have to spend a cent. Modern preppers buy organized hardware kits and cordage in bulk, still sealed in the packaging. She had a working supply of fasteners and cordage that cost her absolutely nothing, assembled one saved piece at a time, always right there in the drawer when she reached for it. Number 6. Hoover stew and the endless pot. There was always a pot on the back of the stove, and it never really emptied. Your great-grandmother started it with whatever she had: an onion, a can of tomatoes, some beans, a handful of macaroni, and it simmered into what people bitterly named Hoover stew after the president they blamed for their hunger. But here is the genius of it. That pot was never finished and started over. Every day, whatever scraps existed went in. The end of a loaf, the last spoonful of corn, a bone with a little meat still on it, the trimmings off the vegetables, all of it disappeared into the pot and became dinner. The stew was different every single night and never ran out because it was constantly being fed. $1 of ingredients spread across a week of meals this way. Modern preppers calculate precise calorie counts and portion out sealed meal pouches one at a time. She ran a rolling pot that turned every scrap in the house into a hot supper and threw nothing away. The pot was the household's stomach, digesting leftovers into new meals, and it kept families fed on the ragged edge of nothing at all. Second pattern break. Here is something the survival industry does not want you to think about too hard. Every product they sell you is designed around the assumption that you will consume and replace forever. The freeze-dried food expires, so you rebuy it. The batteries die, so you restock them. The filters clog, so you order more cartridges. Modern preparedness is a subscription to your own fear, and the companies selling it have every reason to keep you dependent on the next purchase. The Depression household was the exact opposite. It was a closed loop. Ashes and grease became soap. Scraps became stew. Sacks became clothes, then quilts, then rags, then stuffing. Waste from one task became the raw material for the next, around and around, with almost nothing entering and almost nothing leaving. They were not preparing for self-sufficiency. They were already self-sufficient, and it cost them nothing but attention and effort. The most prepared person in America today is not the one with the biggest stockpile. It is the one who could rebuild it from scratch with what other people throw away. Number 5. Eggshells and coffee grounds work twice. Your great-grandmother never met a byproduct she could not put to a second job. Crushed eggshells got dropped into the coffee pot to settle the grounds and take the bitter edge off the brew. Then those same shells and the spent coffee grounds went out to the garden, dug into the soil around the tomatoes to feed them and keep the slugs away. Eggshells were dried and crushed fine and fed back to the hens to harden the shells of the next eggs, a perfect closed circle. Coffee grounds scrubbed grease off pots when soap was scarce. Nothing was ever just garbage. Every worn-out thing had one more use in it, and usually two. Modern preppers buy fertilizer, pest control, and pot scrubbers as three separate products and throw their eggshells and grounds straight in the trash. She turned the leftovers of breakfast into garden food, chicken feed, and cleaning powder without spending a dime. The waste stream of her kitchen fed her garden, which fed her table, which fed her chickens, which fed her waste stream again. She lived inside a system where the end of one thing was always the beginning of another. Number 4. Vinegar cleaned the whole house. Long before the cabinet under the sink held a dozen specialized bottles, there was one jug of vinegar, and it did all of it. Your great-grandmother cleaned her windows with it, scrubbed her floors with it, cut the grease off her dishes, softened her laundry, descaled her kettle, and killed the weeds in the cracks of the wok with it. Diluted, it wiped down every surface in the kitchen and left it disinfected. It rinsed the soap out of hair and shined it. It preserved food, soothed sunburns, and took the sting out of a bee. 1 gallon of vinegar cost a few cents and replaced everything a modern household spends a small fortune on, a different chemical for every single room. Modern preppers stockpile industrial cleaners and disinfectant wipes that expire and dry out and take up shelf after shelf. She had one honest jug that did the work of all of them that never went bad, and that she could have made herself from spoiled cider if she had to. The most versatile cleaning product in history was already in her pantry, and it was the cheapest thing on the shelf. Number 3. Cornmeal mush that never quit. A bag of cornmeal was the cheapest food in America, and your great-grandmother could turn it into a week of meals without repeating herself. At night she boiled it into a thick mush, served hot with a little molasses or a pat of that saved grease, and that was supper. Whatever was left, she poured into a loaf pan and set in the cold pantry to firm up overnight. In the morning, she sliced that solid block and fried the slices in the grease can until they were crisp and golden, and that was breakfast, sometimes with syrup, sometimes with nothing at all. The same 12-cent bag of meal became dinner and breakfast in two completely different forms, with the leftovers of the first becoming the raw material of the second. Nothing was wasted, and no one felt they were eating the same thing twice. Modern preppers stack buckets of specialty survival grains and freeze-dried meals designed to be eaten once and thrown away. She fed her family for pennies a day on a single sack of the plainest food there was, and she made it last by turning last night's leftovers into this morning's meal without a second thought. Third pattern break. Here is what nobody says out loud about all of this. These tricks did not just save money. They built a kind of person we do not really make anymore, a person who looked at a problem and reached for their own hands instead of their wallet, a person who saw a broken thing as something to fix, not replace, a person who understood deep in their bones that security does not come from what you own, but from what you know how to do. When the modern prepper's supplies run out, the modern prepper is finished, standing in an empty pantry with a credit card that does not work anymore. When your great-grandmother's supplies ran out, she just made more because she was never depending on the supplies in the first place. She was depending on herself. That is the real inheritance from the Depression, and it is the one thing you cannot buy in a bucket. The knowledge is free. It is sitting in the memory of anyone still alive who lived it, waiting for someone to ask before it disappears for good. Number 2, bone broth from the whole animal. When a chicken had given up its last piece of meat, your great-grandmother was not finished with it. The carcass, the bones, the neck, the feet, the back, all of it went into a pot of water with an onion and simmered for hours, sometimes all day, until the bones gave up everything they had. The broth that came out was thick with gelatin and minerals, rich enough to coat a spoon, and it became the base of the next soup, the liquid for the next batch of rice, the medicine spooned into anyone who fell sick. She did the same with a ham bone, a beef bone, a fish head, every scrap of animal that most people would have thrown out. One chicken fed the family as meat, then fed them again as broth. Then the broth fed them a third time as soup. Modern preppers buy powdered bone broth in expensive tubs and cases of boxed stock. She extracted the same thing, richer and free, from the bone she was about to throw away. Nothing about an animal was garbage to her. Every part of it fed someone, right down to the last bone in the pot. And that is why so little went so far. Number 1. The scrap bucket and a closed circle. At the top of this list is the thing that tied every other trick together, so plain it barely has a name. The scrap bucket by the back door. Into it went every peel, every trimming, every coffee ground, every eggshell, every bit of food too far gone, even for the stew pot. And that bucket was not garbage. It was the beginning of everything. It fed the pig, who became next year's meat and lard. It fed the chickens, who gave the eggs. What the animals would not eat went on to the garden as compost, where it broke down into the soil that grew the vegetables, that fed the family, that filled the scrap bucket again. Around and around it went, a closed circle where nothing was ever truly thrown away, because there was no such thing as a way. Every scrap became food, became fertilizer, became food again. Modern preppers fill trash bags and haul them to the curb, then drive to the store to buy fertilizer and animal feed and topsoil to replace exactly what they threw out. Your great-grandmother lived inside a system with no waste and no exit, where the end of everything was the start of something else. That was not a survival trick. That was the whole secret. She did not prepare for hard times. She lived a life that hard times could not break because she had already learned to need almost nothing at all. Here is my challenge. Try one of these this week. Just one. Start the grease can. Keep a sourdough starter alive. Save your scraps for a rolling pot of soup. Then come back and tell me if it was harder than you thought, or if it felt like remembering something you already knew. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the grease can get more love than the bone broth, and whether anyone else's grandmother kept a button jar in the kitchen drawer, because these were not just tricks, they were a way of living that we traded away the moment we could afford to, and forgot we ever knew.